I'm Mindy Peterson, and this is Enhanced Life with Music, where we explore the practical ways music transforms everyday life, health, happiness, and beyond. What if a playlist could do more than change your mood? What if it could change how the brain behaves? Today, we're exploring a developing frontier in music and health, music as a therapeutic tool for epilepsy. Epilepsy affects millions of people worldwide, and music and epilepsy have a fascinating relationship. Certain kinds of music have been shown to impact seizure activity, for better or for worse, in some individuals. To help us unpack what the science actually says, what we know so far anyway, and what this looks like in real life, I am joined by Dr. Phillip Pearl, Director of Epilepsy and Clinical Neurophysiology at Boston Children's Hospital and Professor of Neurology at Harvard Medical School. He is also a professional jazz musician and part of the Music and Health Institute at Berklee College of Music. Welcome to Enhanced Life with Music, Phillip.
Well, thank you, Mindy. This is quite a unique experience for me. As I was telling you before we started, I've done podcasts for medical organizations, but nothing quite like this. So,
Well, yeah, we're thrilled to have you here. And this is a topic that I have not yet covered on this podcast. So when I came across another podcast that you had done for, I believe it was the Epilepsy, not the foundation, it was like the International Association,
International
maybe?
League Against Epilepsy, yes.
Okay. So when I ran across that, I thought, oh, wow, I need to connect with this guy and find out what is happening in this area because it looks so fascinating. Starting out, though, can you, and I'll just jump in too and say you present all over the world. We had to kind of bump out our conversation a little bit because of all of your travel schedule. And when we were off the record, when we first got on our call, you were talking about all the places that you're going to be, Taiwan and all over the US, Puerto Rico, lots of other countries, and also not just presenting, but playing, performing your medical practice, operating and treating patients all over the world. So we're thrilled to have you with us here today. Starting off, can you just explain for listeners who aren't intimately familiar with epilepsy, give us just a brief description or explanation of what it is, and also let us know how common it is. How likely is it that someone we know has epilepsy?
Epilepsy is the same as seizure disorder. Of course, you can have seizures from acute situations, and that's not necessarily epilepsy. But if you have epilepsy, it means you have an underlying predisposition to having seizures, meaning electrical storms from the brain. Now, the word epilepsy comes from a Greek word, epilembenein, which means recurrent events or repeated events, because a single seizure doesn't make epilepsy. But if a person has recurrent, repeated seizures, they have epilepsy. Now, epilepsy is kind of a confusing term loaded with all kinds of not just denotations, but connotations and stigma. And in fact, there's a current argument that we should get rid of the term or change the term because of all the historical stigma laden with it.
Ah,
But what it really means is that everyone has a certain threshold to having a seizure. There's a 10% chance any individual will have a seizure in their life, whether it's from a high fever as a young infant or child, to a head injury or something else later in life, to having a low blood sugar, to taking too much of certain drugs, such as cocaine. But the single seizure is not the same as epilepsy. On the other hand, something like 1 to 2% of the population worldwide has epilepsy, around 3 million people in the United States. The Epilepsy Foundation of America estimates, I think 1 in 8 people will have epilepsy.
ah,
It's actually more common than you might think. The incidence is around 1%, and it's most common at the extremes of life, meaning young children in the first years and in the elderly or the older population. And as our population is aging, because we're all living longer, which is wonderful, the rate of epilepsy is going up, up, up because cases of dementia and other disorders that affect folks as they get into the older years are often neurological and can result in epilepsy. So epilepsy is a predisposition to seizures that are electrical events. You can't see them. There's not really a great test to say you have it or you don't in most cases. We do have a wonderful biomarker, that's the EEG, that's the electroencephalogram, which measures the electrical activity of the brain. And that kind of dovetails with the topic that we're going to talk about today because there are more and more studies trying to look at how not just medications and surgeries and implant devices we're using these days to a big extent, but how even music can affect the EEG.
Yeah.
And the jury's still out. I mean, we're not there yet. As you said, it's kind of in its infancy in terms of the research in this area, but it's pretty exciting. Now, music has made major forays into medicine. It's made major impacts in pain. There are certain anesthesiology units that have found that music can reduce the amount of anesthesia a person needs to get through a surgery.
Yeah.
So it clearly has a role in pain, has a role in stress. It makes sense that it would help with stress and anxiety disorders, probably helps with mood disorders. There's a lot of literature that it helps people sleep, but there's also literature saying it interferes with sleep, so that gets to the individualized aspect of it because it turns out when it comes to epilepsy and EEG, the little bit of data there is to support a role of music in how it affects the EEG and how it affects seizures turns out to be very individualized. It doesn't seem like it's the same for everybody. Now with all this fancy imaging that was developed in the latter part of the last century, 1980s, 90s, and so forth, now we have tests like functional MRI, where you could put someone in an MRI machine and have them perform a function like talk or listen to speech or listen to music or even play music because there have been MRI compatible keyboards. And I've been involved with the person who's investigated that. He's written a chapter on that in my upcoming book on this topic
Mm.
to be published by
Wow.
Cambridge University Press on music medicine and the neurobiology of creativity. So you could put piano players in the MRI and have a machine that's not magnetic, so it's compatible, and you can see what part of the brain is activated when you're listening or even playing music. And it's actually very different than the areas when you're speaking or when you're doing other forms of art. And music involves multiple areas of both sides of the brain. There's not a music spot. The old notion of the left hemisphere is sort of the analytical one for right-handed people, and the right hemisphere is the emotional one. That's way simplified and not true. But the point is that music is an incredible art form. It involves both sides of the brain dramatically, not just the cerebrum, but even the cerebellum in the back of the brain and the hindbrain. But there are areas more specialized for it. And the functional MRIs have shown, back to that different people have different tastes in music. And the brain kind of picks it up because if you do a fMRI of someone like me who loves jazz, and then you do an fMRI of someone completely different than me who loves country music, say, it turns out the favorite music still activates the same area for both people, even though it's different forms of music. In that case, it turns out to be the hippocampus and amygdala. And there are other networks in the brain that are very active in music. There's a frontal executive network, there's a default mode network, there's a salience network. We can get into all these networks. But what a point I'm trying to make is neurology has gone from this lesional field to a functional field where we can now map things and see what's happening from music. And we're learning a tremendous amount, but we still don't have all the answers.
Well, it is so wonderful that those functional MRIs were developed because I feel like that has really fueled an explosion of research on the effects of music on the brain, whether it's applied to pain management or epilepsy or Parkinson's, MS. There's so many applications of it. And so that's been really fascinating. And I know a recent guest mentioned too that all the wearables that have exploded in popularity have also helped with being able to understand a little bit more about the effect that music is having on us in various ways. So that's really exciting. You had mentioned the musicogenic seizure, a seizure that's triggered by music. I kind of alluded a little bit in my introduction to this fascinating relationship that music and epilepsy have had. I didn't realize until I was preparing for this conversation that this existed, this musicogenic seizure. And you mentioned that this is an unusual podcast for you to be on. You're speaking to lay people here, and you're used to speaking to medical professionals and other doctors and scientists. But that musicogenic seizure just really intrigued me. That it's a seizure that's triggered by music. From what I could tell, it could be a song from from childhood. It could be always the same song. It could be a specific rhythm that triggers the seizure. Or for some people, it could be any music or just a certain genre. So that was really interesting. I saw that there's also, speaking of this relationship between music and epilepsy, there's audiogenic seizures, which, correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems like any sound is creating a seizure. Is that right?
You got it. You summarized it beautifully.
And then also these auditory seizures where people hear sounds that don't exist, like an auditory hallucination during a seizure. Is that right?
That's exactly right. So
So,
the sound music can trigger a seizure, or they can be the presenting, symptom of the seizure.
yeah, so that was just fascinating to me. But just for time's sake, let's kind of narrow this down and talk a little bit more about when should music be considered as a therapeutic tool or an intervention positively for epilepsy, not triggering seizures, but helping to hopefully reduce seizures.
Well, this is the challenge is, we don't know. Now, music appears very powerful in certain neurological diseases. It doesn't take much to see its power in dementia. In fact, I've played piano in enough nursing homes to see on myself and in my own family members, actually, that what music can do to a person whose memory is slipping away is unbelievable. It will bring back long-term memories, which are the last to go in Alzheimer's disease. First, you lose your short-term memory, of course, and it will bring back lyrics and singing and enjoyment and dancing and movement in a person who really hasn't indicated much memory in a long time.
Yeah, have you seen the documentary Alive Inside?
I have not.
Okay, that's fascinating. It's, boy, 10 years old now at this point. I'm not sure exactly how old it is, maybe even more. But it's, yeah, it's you literally gives you goosebumps to see these people come alive when they've been virtually unresponsive when they hear music that was often important to them in their youth.
And it has applications in Parkinson's disease. It can be entrained in some way to help gait and movement disorders in that sense. In stroke, music therapy has been shown to be able to bring back a person's ability to speak by first using singing, which involves a different part of the brain, although close by or proximate to speech, but different. And by learning to sing again and then to adapt that singing and evolve it into speaking again, it can bring back speech. So music's very powerful in the stroke patient.
And TBI, like Gabby Giffords, relearning how to speak
That's
again,
exactly right.
music therapy after her shooting.
And then music has shown the brain's ability for plasticity at both extremes of life, at all ages of life. For example, there have been studies in premature babies in the neonatal intensive care unit where those exposed to music, as opposed to not, had more calming. Their autonomic nervous system that calms things down, especially the parasympathetic that slows down the heart rate, lowers the blood pressure, was working better. And in follow-up tests at 24 months or 2 years of age, those children did better in emotional behavioral testing, the way they reacted to stressful situations. So,
Wow.
seems like music was helping the premature before they were even due to be born. Then in school-age children, there's strong evidence that playing music is associated with higher academic achievement. Now, that might be very confounded or complicated by who those children are and who their families are and who those parents are and
Sure.
the kind of resources they had and the kind of pushing they had. But still, it shouldn't really take away from the idea that learning music in a youngster is associated with more academic achievement because I think that's still got to help youngsters from every demographic. And then there was a study published not too long ago in the Annals of the New York Academy of Sciences, where they took older adults from ages 65 and up, and they put half of them in piano lessons who were musically naive. They were not musicians. And they put half of them in a music appreciation course where they just kind of sat there and listened to music and talked about it. And after 6 months, the older adults who started piano lessons for the first time had increased size of their brain, of the temporal lobe cortex where music goes, compared to those who didn't. So even
It's never too
it's
late.
never too late to start taking piano lessons. Even my own wife, who's another physician, she took them as a child, but has started taking them again. And so have a lot of my colleagues who've heard me get.
Well, and I think I saw somewhere that she did that as a result of some of your research and what it showed about
Well, not
music
only she, but
training's effect on the
several of my
brain.
colleagues have contacted me and said, "Hey, I'm taking piano lessons again, or I'm back in music," and they're past retirement.
Because of what they're seeing in your research specifically?
Oh, no, well, either my work or what I've reported or
Okay.
what I've talked about. So, the plasticity is incredible. Now, how is it gonna help epilepsy? This is a harder nut to crack. The Mozart effect has been very popular in the lay public, you might say. You know, the Mozart effect was described years ago. I think it might have been in the '60s or '70s, a long time ago. And what they found is a group of young adults took some IQ tests after listening to Mozart's I wanna say 448. It's the two-part, piano in D major.
Yes, sonata for 2 pianos in D
Yeah,
major, I
yeah,
think.
and they found that after listening to it, they had higher performance IQ, which is not the verbal, but the performance, like motor stuff or motor perceptual kind of testing. And that got translated or transmuted, you might say, into the Mozart effect, where people started thinking, "Well, hey, if I'm listening to Mozart while I'm pregnant, my baby will be smarter." I mean, it led to all this commercialization of baby Mozart. So it's very
Well, and I think that may have sort of been peaking around the time that my kids were born because I remember these baby Mozart CDs, DVDs were really popular at the time, and I got them.
so
And I
did my
know
wife.
since then that research has been a little bit debunked. They
Right.
found some flaws in how the research was conducted. But I will say, as a parent, I swear by those DVDs. I mean, my kids, I remember my oldest, right around the time in the afternoon that I was starting to prepare dinner was like the witching hour for her. And she would get so fussy. And that was the one time I would put her in front of a screen. And I would put that baby Mozart DVD on, or baby Beethoven, baby Bach. We had several of them. And she would just calm right down. It was magic. So I understand some of the research may have been debunked, but I swear by those videos.
Well, I hear you because every time I hear Mozart, I feel like I'm getting a little smarter. So anyway,
Uh, but back to, yes,
so
epilepsy.
a bunch of investigators have now explored the effects of Mozart's 448 as well as other pieces of music on people with epilepsy, on their seizures, and on their EEGs, even invasively implanted electrodes into the brain where you can really record inside the brain in the seizure-producing areas. And some of the studies have found that that piece in particular reduces spike discharges and is associated with reduced seizures, but not all studies have. Other studies have found that it's not so much that piece, but it's certain aspects of that piece. Like if you have to play it at the certain speed where it's supposed to be, which is kind of quick, but if you play it faster or slower, it doesn't work.
Ah,
And there's a group from so the Czech Republic that just presented a couple posters I noticed at the recent meeting I attended in Lisbon of the International League Against Epilepsy, speaking of the ILAE, where I did a podcast about music and epilepsy that you mentioned. And, that group found that they didn't really study that piece of Mozart, but another Mozart piece, and they compared it to a Philip Glass piece, like a keyboardist piece, and they compared it to some movie theme and some calming music and some more upbeat, lively music, that it was just different for different people.
hmm.
But for some people, whatever piece of music it was consistent in how it decreased their spikes. And they tried to base it on various acoustic features like the volume or the speed or the harmonics or the pitch. And it wasn't clear that they really came up with anything except just like when I said a person's favorite piece of music activates the same part of the brain, even though your favorite is going to be different than my favorite. It seems like for some people, it's a unique aspect of the music that can reduce their spikes.
Okay, so it's not even a certain timbre or structure like
Well,
classical music,
it has,
or
yeah,
it can be vastly different from person to
right.
person, like country music or
It
Oh,
might be
okay.
a timbre, but for that person and not for everybody.
Okay. So is there a way to measure, like with an EEG, like what healthy electrical activity looks like in a person's brain and then find music that sort of matches that? Or what's the process to try to either identify the music that's going to help a particular person, or what does that look like?
Well, I mean, I don't think we're there, but that's where epilepsy researchers are trying to go in terms of implanted recordings where you get more accurate kind of picture of that seizure onset zone. Now,
Okay.
there's a whole 'nother group of research that I'm not involved with, using music to entrain rhythms of the brain. Not so much spikes or seizure activity, but just entrain the natural rhythms of the brain, and there is data to support that you can entrain rhythms of the brain using music.
Okay, so that's just encouraging consistent
Yeah.
rhythms to avoid those spiking electrical
Well, I don't know
activities
if
that
it would
cause the
avoid
seizure.
spiky electrical activity, but it might promote, it's sort of like in biofeedback. There's been some data, although I think it's not confirmed, that you can treat things like post-traumatic stress disorder with biofeedback. I do think that's real, in various ways, but one way might be to use music to get the EEG to have a more relaxed rhythm than the more tense rhythms. For example, we have alpha rhythm, which is kind of a dominant rhythm when you're awake, eyes closed, just relaxing, versus a beta rhythm when you're kind of eyes open and stressed out. So the idea would be to try to increase your alpha rhythm, and relaxation can do that. And that's how biofeedback works. Well, music may be able to provide that kind of biofeedback as well.
One of my favorite ways to enhance my life with music is to play just for fun songs on the piano at the end of the day. My current favorites are ABBA songs and songs from the 80s, like We Are the World. With sheet music direct, I can explore new music, track my favorites, play and download scores anytime from any device. This online treasure trove of digital sheet music is powered by music publisher Hal Leonard and has over 1 million arrangements ready to view, listen to, and download instantly. Prices start at just 99 cents and include selections for every instrument, genre, and skill level. My family has relied on sheet music direct for years for musical joy and convenience. For an entire musical library at your fingertips, visit sheetmusicdirect.com. Maybe what we should do is talk about what research has already been done on the application of music to epilepsy, what research is ongoing in this space.
So there have been about a dozen investigations, I'd say, of the effects of either the Mozart piece, the Crucial 448, or the D major two-part piano
Uh-huh.
piece, uh, or other forms of music, but mainly that. And most of the studies have shown that there is a beneficial effect, but a meta-analysis raised the concern that most of the studies were biased and not properly controlled with confounders, and that there's sort of biases in terms of publishing positive effects versus not publishing negative effects. So it's I would say there is some evidence, but it's very preliminary, for Mozart or any piece of music to really improve seizures. But you will find articles that'll say it. And the consensus right now is it's not going to replace regular therapy like medication, or when appropriate surgery or implants or even diets. Like we do have epilepsy diets, the ketogenic diet being the main one.
Ah,
It's
mhm.
not going to replace any of those, but it could supplement them.
So, back to that question about who should be considering music as an intervention for epilepsy, would it be people who are resistant to drugs or just people who want to supplement what they're already doing that may be helping and maybe working? Kind of supplement that?
Oh, I would think it'd be anybody.
So, anybody with epilepsy could consider this, whether it's a supplement or
Well,
if they're
but
drug resistant?
there's really nothing to do. I mean, right now, right now we don't know enough to know what to do. So
With music
yeah,
specifically?
with music for epilepsy, I
Okay.
don't even.
So what research is ongoing? Because I know the
Yeah.
Mozart research that we've been talking about, that was, like we said, decades ago. What's going on now in
No,
terms
no,
of
that's
research?
very active now. The
Oh, really?
decades ago was sort of discovering the Mozart effect, for better or worse, because we don't even know if it's real. The current research is to see if it really does help, and we don't know. But there's some evidence that it might. It just has to be studied on a larger scale. No, I don't want to give anyone the impression that they should run out and do music therapy as a treatment for epilepsy, because that would be basically super alternative thinking.
So right now, there is no established
It's
tool
not an
for
established
music.
tool, but it's just very, very interesting.
And would you say showing promise?
So yeah, yeah, to some
That wasn't very convincing.
right, right. No, but I'm coming from a position where I'm not gonna recommend something that's not well established.
What is the research that's ongoing now look like in light of the fact that we do have these functional MRIs now, things like that? I mean, do people are the is does the research look like somebody having a functional MRI done? Do they have electrodes being attached to their head and then or are they doing EEGs and measuring brain activity while they're listening to certain music? What does that research look like?
The research now is in basically two forms. One is having patients who are undergoing epilepsy surgery with implanted electrodes, implanted stereotactically, which means from different directions, like a stereo sound. And while they are being recorded, and while the seizures are being recorded, investigators are using music to determine whether it changes those recordings, decreases the amount of spikes, or changes the spikes, or decreases the amount of actual seizures. Because a spike is just kind of like a biomarker. It's like a lightning strike, but the actual seizure is when the lightning strikes go into an electrical storm. That's the seizure itself, is the electrical storm. The
Oh.
spike is basically a biomarker that one is predisposed to seizures and may not cause any effect at all, positive or negative. And if music reduces spikes, that doesn't mean it'll help somebody, but it sort of seems like it would. So that's the main area of research in terms of music and epilepsy right now.
Do you think that being a musician yourself has changed how you research this topic, how you ask clinical questions about epilepsy?
Well,
I mean, you're a neurologist who lives at the intersection of music and medicine. How has that impacted how you practice or research?
sure, because I'm going to ask questions and think about this both as a neurologist and as a musician, because I hang out in both camps. I'm in 3 jam sessions a week right now with
Oh, good for
people who are
you.
really into it, or they went to Berkeley, or they're currently at Berkeley, which is here in Boston, of course, where I am. And I played with the Longwood Symphony Orchestra, which is an orchestra of musicians in the Longwood Medical area at Harvard Medical School. That's a very, very fine orchestra. I was in the percussion section. I
Oh,
was a percussion major
interesting.
back when I was a kid at Johns Hopkins and the Peabody Conservatory of Music in Baltimore, where I grew up. So it does affect, but it's true of everything. No matter what you do in life, your lived experience affects it, right? So, and like in your case, you're a musician, you're a piano teacher, but you're also a podcaster, and you're working in the higher echelon of piano world with Steinways and things like that.
Uh-huh.
So that affect your ability as a musician affects your conversation right now, because
Oh,
you're thinking
definitely.
about it as a pianist and as a piano teacher as you are, and so it's the same with me. And also, I've been able to integrate music and medicine in a unique way, in a sense, and others have done it too. But it's still kind of special. Where, for example, we love in medicine the CPC, the clinical pathologic correlation, where you talk about a person's illness and then show the pathology. But I've done these things of clinical pathologic correlations with a great musician. So I've covered Beethoven's deafness and Schumann's madness, Robert Schumann, and Clara Schumann, her own rheumatism and strokes, and Ravel's dementia, and Shostakovich's neuropathy, and Cole Porter had phantom leg pain when his leg was amputated. One of the first examples of that. And George Gershwin had the olfactory seizures that eventually was his brain tumor that he died of because he herniated from the undiagnosed tumor. And I've had the ability to explain their medical histories and then their musical histories and play their music at the same time to
Mm.
bring it all together. Because
Mhm.
I find that the heart of creativity is combinatorial, is combining things. It's very hard to have an original thought, but if you start combining music and medicine and neurology and EEG and epilepsy, then you can do really creative things, because creativity comes out of bringing all these disparate or seemingly disparate areas together.
Well, if you were to imagine what a future treatment could look like where music is being used as a therapeutic tool for those with epilepsy, what do you think that would look like? Would that be like an individualized playlist that somebody could listen to on a regular basis to just help normalize their brain's electrical activity and kind of use that entrainment concept to that benefit? Or what would you anticipate this treatment looking like?
Yeah, I think that's a great idea. In fact, I'm mentoring a high school student right now who's a musician who's trying to do that exactly.
Okay.
She has epilepsy. She's trying to take other high school kids with epilepsy and find out what music they like and what music helps their seizures by exposing them to music. So this picks up on what we've been talking about is people have their favorite, and there's certain musical aspects that seem to help some form of epilepsy. It's thought that it's via a parasympathetic mechanism, which is the part of our autonomic nervous system that calms us down. So to put that in layman's terms, if one can determine the genre of music or the types of pieces that leads to relaxation responses in a kind of a form of biofeedback, then implementing that for a person's stress disorder, anxiety disorder, or epilepsy may be the ticket.
So I'm just thinking, as a parent, we were talking about the Mozart effect and those baby Mozart DVDs that, regardless of the research, I stand behind those just for my daughter and what I saw they did for her. So let's say you're a parent and you have a child with epilepsy, or you're an adult and you have epilepsy. What would you say to them, maybe doing an experiment and saying, "Hey, I noticed that when I listen to this song or this artist or this genre or this, maybe it's classical music or whatever it is, I just noticed that my brain feels more relaxed," or some other, I don't even know what they would look for, but if they notice that in themselves or they notice that in their child, what do you think about them doing an experiment and just playing that music more regularly, or playing it before they go to bed, or playing it before they're going into a stressful situation, or any recommendations for people to just sort of be their own, you kind of hear that term N of one, like I'm my own person, that I'm just seeing how this works for me.
I think that's a great idea as long as you don't forget to combine it with exercise and taking your medication.
Sure. Well, as you know, I ask all my guests to close out our conversation with a musical ending, a coda. In the past, I've asked a different question, but with this being our first episode of 2026, I'm switching up the question for this year. And for this year's musical ending, I'm asking guests to share a musical tool that you wish more people knew about. And this could be a book or a blog, an app, a therapeutic tool, or anything that enables you to enhance your life with music. So, do you have a tool that you can tell us about today?
You know, I have the mom of a patient who's absolutely wonderful, and I worked with her daughter with epilepsy, but she sent well, first of all, she asked, "How did I get interested in medicine?" And I told her, "Well, I read this book when I was 11 years of age called Stories of Great Physicians." And it was, like, about Hippocrates and Salk and Sabin and Madame Curie and Louis Pasteur and those kind of people. And I just thought this is the greatest thing to be. So she found the book, Stories of Great Physicians, and she sent it to me, and I couldn't believe how juvenile it was when it actually came to me that I actually cited it. On the other hand, she also sent me a book that I had never heard of, and it's called Year of Wonder: Classical Music to Enjoy Day by Day by an author named Clemency Burton Hill, who I have never met. But this woman is remarkable because it's a book that takes you from the beginning of the year, and it's
Yeah.
January 1st to the very end, December 31st, and every day of the year, she has a different page and recommends a piece of classical music and has a couple paragraphs describing the composer and the music and its applicability to modern life, and it is remarkable, and you could just like me, you go on YouTube and you can listen to the piece, which usually only takes a few minutes, and it's my inspiration of the day.
Oh, wow.
And then, about a year later, the mother sent me a volume 2 called Another Year of Wonder. It turns out this author had a massive brain hemorrhage, lost her ability to speak, had to go through rehabilitation, regained her faculties, and wrote a volume 2 as a comeback, which is just as wonderful. So now every morning when I come to work, the first thing I do, if I remember and have time, is I look at the pages for that day, like today will be January 7th, and I'll open it up and it'll tell me what to listen to, and I'll read it, and it's just the most inspirational, relaxing moment. So that and going to the pool in the morning, which is another thing I do, is what I recommend for one's health.
Oh, that's wonderful. I look forward to checking that book out. Year of Wonder?
Year of Wonder.
I'll put a link in the show notes for listeners so they can easily get their hands on it. And what a story of resilience too for that author, coming back
Yeah,
from the injury. Yeah.
I know, and I tell you, I deal with families every day whose resilience is incredible,
Oh, I bet.
believable, and, that's really the story of life. That's the human struggle,
Mm, well
and
put.
so if we can make an impact with something as beautiful as music, then we did something good today. Thank you, Mindy.
If this is a topic that interests you, I will put links in the show notes to 2 studies showing promising research about music's use as a therapeutic tool for epilepsy. There will also be links to a transcript of this conversation and related episodes you may enjoy, including music as an intervention for dementia, multiple sclerosis, and Parkinson's disease, an interview with Gabby Gifford's music therapist, who used music to help Gabby regain her ability to speak after her shooting. We referenced that in our conversation today, and all episodes related to science and health. You may already know that all Enhanced Life with Music episodes can be found listed by category, so you can quickly find topics most related to your interests. In addition to science and health, the other 3 categories are sports and entertainment, education and community, and business. Just go to the archives tab of my website. All Enhanced Life with Music episodes are evergreen, so be sure to check out the back catalog for more ways that music can make your life better. You can always connect with me on email, mindy@mpetersonmusic.com, Facebook, Instagram, X, or LinkedIn, and by signing up for my monthly e-newsletter. Thank you so much for joining me today and for sharing the show. Until next time, may your life be enhanced with music.